Tom Mulcair, where would you like to start? Or perhaps I should say, I'm seeing just now a note that says Donald Trump says auto tariffs are coming around April 2nd. What do you make of this?
I make of it the same thing that
As
we've been
everything
going
else,
through
yeah.
daily and hourly with Donald Trump. Something pops into his head. Somebody gives him a word, an idea. We have had an auto pact with the United States for over 60 years. This goes back to the mid-'60s. It was the first big international trade deal that essentially knocked down borders on something this large. Like Europe, yes, there was the European, well, it wasn't even the economic community at the time, but Europe was slowly but surely coming together. And Canada and the United States were part of a movement that really took flight, where you're saying, we will only keep barriers to trade that are absolutely necessary and that are agreed to, and the rest basically is going to start to come down. And so Trump's now talking about cars. It doesn't matter. Because given the fact that in the weeks that we've been talking about his first salvo over bringing in this tariff or that 10% on this or that 25% plus 25% plus anything else he wants to tack on, absolutely none of this has happened. So now he's threatening Europe. Europe's pushing back, saying, we're pretty well structured. Our economy is huge, and we'll fight you every step of the way. If you really want your own economy to collapse, go ahead, keep going, but we'll fight you and we'll be able to handle ourselves.
You know, I wonder this idea, though, we've been so focused on, obviously, on what he said about Canada, and we have to concern ourselves with how we're going to reply, whether we have retaliatory tariffs or not. But now this idea of, it's Donald Trump versus the world. You mentioned the European Union now. There has been pushback, right? It's not just, they're not just sitting on their hands and saying, no, that's fine, go ahead and talk. They're going to plan to do something as well. Yeah,
because their total economy is 10 times that of Canada. And that's the thing. I mean, we're very much in lockstep with the United States. I go back to, when I was in CJAD and in university, these were big conversations, books like Close the 49th Parallel, et cetera, that had to do mostly with the fact that there was perceived to be too much American ownership already, and we should develop an independent foreign policy and be an independent country. But everybody simply took note of the fact that we were doing pretty well on the world stage. People liked us. We didn't have as much stuff to worry about as the Americans do, and things were just going to hobble along. And whenever anybody said, but we don't really have the ability to do anything, and I remember René Lévesque's answer, what would you do if the Americans invaded? And Lévesque just made a funny mime and gesture, and he said, I would just say welcome, because there's absolutely nothing we could do about it. And that, I think, at the back of our minds is something that really bugs Canadians with what Donald Trump is doing, because we can say, that we're not going to become the 51st state. But if this lunatic if push were ever to come to shove with Donald Trump, then it could get quite complicated very quickly.
We have a guest, by the way, we're going to have on just after 5:30 talking specifically about that. His name is Stephen March. I don't know if you've ever read Stephen March, but he's talking about this specifically and the fact that, we've gone beyond it being a joke. We know that already, right?
Yep.
He talks about this literally every single day, and he's not done calling Justin Trudeau Governor Trudeau either. So at some point, you have to be aware of the fact that in his head, perhaps, he thinks this is something that could actually happen. Do we not?
I don't think he believes it for one second.
No?
No. But I know that he's the type of schoolyard bully who's always come up with a name for everybody else, whether it was little Marco Rubio, who's now his Secretary of State. So I guess he wasn't that bad after all. But this is the Trump way. You're dealing with an 11-year-old, and in every sense, a very spoiled kid who got all his money from his dad, and he's not a self-made man. He's not Howard Lutnick. Howard Lutnick, Commerce Secretary, he's the real deal. Okay.
Well, which doesn't that make you wonder, Tom? You mentioned Howard Lutnick, who's made a lot of money in the legitimate world, right?
Yes, exactly.
And he's his commerce chair. And the thing I ask myself is, these are smart people. Why would you want to attach yourself to that?
Because Lutnick is going to be able to make his own calls in a couple of weeks, months, because Trump will have moved on to something else. Lutnick, I think, is the perfect example of somebody who is so much smarter than Trump and is able, and we just talked about Marco Rubio, somebody else who's extraordinarily capable. But then he brings in lunatics, his national security, the key person in charge of U.S. security and intelligence might as well be a Russian spy, because that's what they considered her before he named her.
Okay.
And we've always known how close Trump was to Russia, and now he's basically bullying his way through to a solution that he's cooked up, that he's only talking about with Vladimir Putin, who has been put, completely outside the sphere of European considerations right now. NATO is on watch. They've been cutting cables to countries like Germany. This is bad actors at their worst. Hundreds of thousands of people have been killed. And Trump says, well, I'm going to sit down with him because he's my buddy, and this guy, Zelensky, I'll let him talk to my vice president when he gets a moment. So this is the world of Trump. This is the real stuff. The constant nattering about what he's going to do about tariffs. There are at least one or two people around him saying, boss, you do understand that the cost of a Ford 150 goes up by $1,500. You understand that if you ever do tariff aluminum to the tune of 25%. So he knows that the attendant inflation will be blamed on him. He'll say it's Canada's fault. It's like South Park, blame it on Canada. But the average American consumer doesn't care about that. They'll only care about the fact that a tank of gas is going to be costing them $20 more.
Yeah, when it actually hits home. All right, let me ask you one last thing. Pardon me. We know that the Conservatives have a big get-together this weekend. Pierre Poilievre, I was talking about this the other day. He's kind of run out of slogans now because nothing can stick anymore between carbon tax and, Canada's broken. Yeah. So what's the approach here? And by the way, I will note today that he actually said that what do you say here? The parliamentary press is made up of liberal media, and he wants independent media to be able to ask questions of elected officials with the federal parliament. This is exactly what Donald Trump did a few days ago.
Right.
What's the point of this?
You might have noticed, it's just a tiny detail, but Parliament isn't sitting and will not sit until the election. So let's parse what you just read. That's the exact quote. He's now, it's not enough for him to attack the CBC as being a bunch of liberal stooges. Now he's saying the entire parliamentary press gallery. So these are people who are actually writing all the articles and filing all the stories that Canadians will be reading and watching and listening to during the entire election campaign. Now, if he wants to sit down with rebel media and he wants to sit down with his favorite handpicked people, nobody's going to read it. Nobody's going to watch it because it's not media that anybody's going to watch other than conservatives. Right. So he can do as many podcasts as he wants with, this psychologist who claims to be all about, telling people how to stand up, and he's the favorite darling of the conservatives. You know what? Nobody cares about Jordan Peterson other than people who are already voting Conservative. There will be a huge rally tomorrow. It will be remarked because there will be a heck of a lot of people there. But I'll go to something else that happened today. Andrew Scheer wanders down the stairs of Parliament. The journalists, the ones that he and Poilievre hate, were actually standing there. And it got coverage because I was doing CTD and, the whole thing was covered well. And he stands there and he says this. The problem with fentanyl is the fact that Justin Trudeau and Mark Carney have been careless and incompetent on fentanyl for the last 9 years. Now, Aaron, you know as well as I do that Andrew Scheer is just emoting for the ages. This is just to try to get attention. But if that's the level of lunacy and disconnection with reality that they're going to bring to the next campaign, they can blame journalists all they want. Now what's happening is we're seeing that they're starting to dissemble. They don't know what to say next. Right. I have to say that I've admired how Poilievre has done this. He's tried to come up with something new almost every day, but it's just not getting any traction because Canadians want something solid, serious, and competent against the lunatic Donald Trump. And they're looking at Poilievre and saying, you know what? Denigrating people, screaming at them, talking down to them, that's very 2024. What we need is an adult, and they see in Mark Carney an adult, and that's what's going to be the tail of the tape. Nobody knows right now. Nobody called the current mess 2 months ago. Nobody knew that we would be here with Trump. So nobody knows exactly where we're going to be 2 months from now on election day, because Carney comes in on March 9th, working hypothesis, March 14th or 15th. Beware the Ides of March. I think that we're going to see a very rough and tumble campaign. The Conservatives have tons of dough. They'll throw everything at this thing. And I'm not making any prediction as to how it's come out, but I'm going to tell you that nobody would have thought that there would be serious polling, national polling, in mid-February showing the Conservatives and the Liberals under Carney as a potential leader, neck and neck, and that's exactly where they are.
Yeah, ain't that the truth, as they say. Yeah. I would ask you one last thing, Tom, just real quick. Do you think the Conservatives at some point here, as they look for a strategy moving forward, try to tie Carney into Trump?
Well, nothing's impossible, but they're trying to tie Carney into 9 years of liberal incompetence on hard drugs. So anything's possible. In fantasy hypothesis for fantasy hypothesis, remember what the Bloc did with Gilles Duceppe and dragged him into the 2015 campaign? He wasn't even the leader, but they had a leader that the Deep Sixth, and they just took the mothballs off Gilles Duceppe, brought him out, and he brought back party status. They'd been down to 4 members, and they made it over the magic number, and they all of a sudden had party status, and were able to come back under Yves-François Blanchet. So here's my only advice. If the Conservatives really want to have a fighting chance in the next election, why don't they go with that statesman who was out there fighting for Canada, talking about the Canadian flag, a certain Stephen Harper, who has been showing himself to be a real adult on these conversations around Trump, rather than these addled, juvenile slogans and name calling that we've been getting from Poilievre and Andrew Scheer.
Welcome, Stephen Harper. Wouldn't that be something to see him show up? All right.
Well, if we're trading fantasy
why not?
scenarios,
Yeah, sure.